Imagine building a company that is on the cutting edge of science and on the way we manage medicine and disease. I mean, the mission is phenomenal, but how do you build a culture that will bring the right team of people in to accomplish such a big mission? We're going to talk today to Tim Liu, the co-founder and CEO of Senti Biosciences, about how he's done it. Tim Liu, welcome to How I Turned the Corner.
Thanks, Kendra. Thanks for having me.
So you have one of the most diverse backgrounds that I've met so far in my journey here with this podcast. So as I understand it, you have a background in computer science, bioengineering, and on top of that, you're a phenomenal leader. I will declare that. That's not necessarily on your profile because most people don't talk to them about themselves that way. But you're on this mission to create this whole new generation of smarter medicine that will kind of outmaneuver the complex diseases in a way that has never really been done before. So while balancing this huge mission, you're also building this incredible culture. So what was it like in the early days of Senti? How did you get going with this business?
Yeah, so just a bit of background, I started my career actually as a professor at MIT. This is where the technology behind Senti actually grew out from. And basically what we had developed along with some of our other colleagues and co-founders of the company are basically ways of programming living cells as medicines. And we think this can really overcome a lot of the current limitations of the types of drugs we take today, which, go into the body, go out, and are kind of, static or quite simplistic in their function. And so, as you mentioned, really at the core of what we're doing at Senti is to try to create living medicines based on, our own cells, and have those cells actually, go throughout the body, hunt down disease, and treat the disease in a much more targeted and controlled way. This is a pretty daunting and sort of challenging thing to bring to fruition. It requires a very concerted effort between, science, people who know how to engineer cells, program biology, et cetera, but also work really close hand in hand with folks who can take these products, make the products, manufacture them, take them into the clinic for trials, execute those trials, and hopefully be successful in that way. And so from the beginning, when we started Senti, we've always recognized that we actually need a team with diverse expertise. This wasn't going to be a company that was going to be solved with just a few people in a narrow set of capabilities, but people who span the entire life cycle of bringing a new drug to the market and all the challenges that need to be overcome throughout that process. So I think first and foremost, when we started Senti back in 2016 with a small group of people, we really focused the culture of the company on teamwork, trying to build something that would be transformative and built to last, and then ultimately focused on the science and the ultimate beneficiaries, which are the patients we're trying to help. And I think that has helped us along the way build a culture where people come into the company quite aligned with the mission of trying to treat diseases where we don't have, drugs available today to effectively combat those illnesses. And then a really, sort of unified vision on leveraging sort of the novel science that we're building at Senti to try to tackle those issues.
Mm-hmm. So on your website, you have a great page. Your hiring page is amazing because you really talk about the culture on the page, and you've got your mission and your values. And then you even have videos of some of the, testimonials from some of your employees. How has that worked for you from a hiring and recruiting process? Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, no, I think, first of all, much credit to the Senti team and the people function within the company to ensure that we can really showcase the culture externally. But I think from the beginning, we really recognized that it was going to be the people that we brought in early on that would help set the culture and also propagate that culture. So I started Senti together with my co-founder, Philip Lee. We were classmates 20 years ago at MIT together. And I think in part sort of that closeness and that trust that we had in each other was really helpful from the beginning. And I think the first few people we brought into the company were really in that mold. We wanted to find people who believed in the long-term mission and would basically become evangelists for what we were trying to do here. And unfortunately, that culture has continued to permeate. I think we have found that, scientists and engineers and people on the G&A side, everyone throughout the organization, if they're passionate and excited about what we're doing internally, they can actually be the best ambassadors for recruiting new talent into the company.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, I've noticed over the years that there's a perception in especially bioscience and really heavy engineering companies that they don't believe culture is important. And I think that's one of the things that really differentiates you is because you do recognize that it's important. But I think it's because in general, unfortunately, I think engineers have been kind of overlooked often as people who do desire and want a great culture too. So I think it's just one of those really neat things that you've done to really set yourself apart from other organizations, just based on my experience working with other bioscience companies who often just kind of treat it as a flippant thing. But you seem really intentional with it.
And I think part of that was, lessons learned. In academia, where I started my own career, things tend to be more of, lone wolf style, right? There's a very clear credit system you get if you publish a paper and you're that first author, and you get all the majority of the credit for doing that. And I think that culture sometimes permeates into industry, unfortunately, sometimes. I think at Senti, what we realized early on is what we were trying to do was not turnkey. It was not simple. There was not a pre-trodden path. And so we had to create sort of new ways of doing the science and bringing it forward. And that was necessarily going to require team-based science. And so it wasn't a situation where, like Tim Liu is trying to declare credit for himself that we've been successful, but rather the team as a whole needs to be pulling together and needs to be trying to, be successful together. And so that was really the important part of trying to establish that culture from the beginning, just because we recognized that was a necessary thing that we had to do to try to achieve the goals that we had in mind.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. So tell me, like, what have been some of your mental blocks that you have found over the years that have, sometimes gotten in the way, created some problems for you in terms of the culture?
I think sometimes when people come from other organizations, or maybe it's their first time in industry and they're making a transition from the academic side into industry, they may be used to a different way of operating. And so for Senti, it's been pretty important as people have come in to really emphasize that we are a science-based organization. We are trying to do the best that we can for patients, and so it's really about putting your ego down and working closely together with the rest of the team to achieve those goals. I don't think we've had like major issues with people not fitting into that mindset, but it sometimes is a transitionary thing that we've done within the company. And then the second thing I would mention is, as any biotech company knows, as you grow from early stage science to getting closer and closer to the patient, sort of the expertise that's required as you grow necessarily diversifies and increases. And so certainly managing organizationally, growing from a handful of people to over 100, and how to sort of communicate throughout the organization, and also bring in really diverse set of experiences into the organization, integrating that into the existing team structure has always been something that we've continued to have to emphasize and evolve and learn from each other over time.
Hmm. So tell us, you have a lot of open positions at this point on the website, I noticed. What kinds of people are you looking for? And what, not this the skill set, but like what's the personality that you really look for?
Yeah, I think the main thing is people who come in and believe in the ultimate mission at the end of the day, right? We are here not just to do cool science, but ultimately solve important clinical challenges and cure disease. And so I think everyone that we bring on board needs to be bought into that idea, because the challenges of a biotech company going through the ups and downs of clinical trials where a lot of things fail, only a few things actually succeed. You got to have a lot of endurance to go through that. And so number one, that's really important in our hiring process. Number two is a willingness for people to essentially power through the challenges that we see every day when we're trying to bring this novel science forward. So I think those sort of characteristics are really important for us as we continue to bring people on board and expand the team.
Hmm. Do you feel a shortage of talent in this field, or do you feel that you are picky?
Good question. Biotech and biopharma continues to be a really hot area, despite some of the recent market challenges. I think the need for new medicines isn't going away, so it certainly continues to be a competitive marketplace out there, especially for very specific roles in our space where there's not that many people who've done it before. And so sometimes we've looked at bringing sort of in the best athlete, not necessarily the person who's done it before, and making sure that we can train that person or adapt that person's prior expertise to do what we need him or her to do. So I think that's some of the ways we've been trying to use to adapt our hiring processes to sort of deal with the challenges of hiring.
Hmm. How would you describe yourself as a leader? What would be some, or how would your staff describe you, do you think? Make it a little easier on you.
You could ask them, I think. What I hope I strive to do is to be pretty open and fair about where we're going, not to sugarcoat things. I think we already operate in an environment, in the drug development field where it's pretty black and white. If the drug doesn't work, it's not moving forward, right? So we all have to, and if it works, we'll all be successful and the patients will ultimately benefit. So I think number one, like being very ethical and being sort of science driven is sort of key within Senti, letting the data and the science tell us what direction we should move in next. This is not a place where we can make up stuff and sort of take the company in that direction, right? There's underlying science of what, the truth that we need to be able to achieve. So that's like, I think, first and foremost. I think secondly is really trying to encourage collaboration. As I mentioned, I personally started in this field more as a basic scientist, sort of developing the core technologies that underlie our medicines. But I need a lot of teamwork around me, as well as the team that we built to really take those programs forward. Every one of those steps along the way is expertise that I don't personally have. And so being sort of open about that and knowing that, we bring people in and we sort of entrust them with sort of the skills they bring to the table, I think is something I try to emphasize, and hopefully that permeates throughout the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. So I'm going to add one more thing onto that, just observing you and after working with so many people myself, but you also have a high level of emotional intelligence, it seems, which is, again, kind of unusual in your field. Is that something that you are aware of or you're focusing on? Do you work to grow that?
I think it's something we actively try to work on internally at Senti. Our people organization, we have a great set of folks, small number of them for the organization size that we have, but people who are really passionate about helping our leaders grow within the company and actually everyone throughout the organization. So we do make employee training resources available. We spend time with folks, not just talking about sort of the science and the process and how we do things, but also really spending time on like understanding interpersonal interactions, how to best sort of treat other people in this organization. And it's been pretty fun to watch. Like there's a lot of grassroots initiatives there when we've had, employees on their own who, proactively want to be part of like, dispute resolution, and they sort of offer themselves up as a resource after they've gone through a training or certification course. Or, people who actively spend time, putting on fun team building events, outside of their day job, just because they really believe in that. So I think the democratization of that idea across the organization is one thing that is really important to us, and something, was really surprising to me because again, starting out in academia, it's not something you really think about very much, and it's not something you're trained to do. And it's been fun to see sort of the people who bring in take that onto their own shoulders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a study that was recently came out from, I think it was from Gardner Group, that was basically saying that they studied organizations that have created cultures where people have friendships and allow that friendship and actually encourage things outside of work. Their ability to retain people goes up by like 90%. I mean, it was like a phenomenal number. Yeah, just by having a friend at work. Yeah. So that's neat that those things are happening outside of work. That's a good sign or an indicator that you've built a good culture for sure. So another element of, bioscience, biotech that I think can be really challenging is failure. Do you, tell me about your feelings around failure?
Well, look, I think, it's funny when the outside world learns about science, I think they have a little bit of a misinterpretation of how most scientists operate. I think there's a sense that sort of people know what they're doing every step along the way, and there's very little failure in the process because you really just usually hear about the good news, right? You really don't hear about the failures. I think the one thing that I really want to emphasize is, regardless of what field of science or engineering you're in, you spend most of your time dealing with failures, right? The way you learn about how to be successful is you fail like 99 times and then you figure out the one right time that actually works. And that's been true for me ever since I was a sort of a graduate student, sort of learning how to do science, to being a professor, and then even now at Senti, right? Most of the stuff that we create does not work, but it's through that process of learning of why things don't work that you realize how to make things work properly. So I think the really important thing is throughout, not just Senti, but I think the entire scientific community, is to recognize that failure is not a bad thing. It's really about learning through those failures and accepting that the failure is telling you something really important about how the underlying science works. And I hope that sort of openness can permeate, the entire field. Again, this is not just something about Senti. There's been a lot of longstanding concerns about how, people only report positive results in the biofield. And as a result, we're missing out on all the negative results that we can learn from. A few years ago, there was even a journal of negative results that was started to try to encourage people to publish their negative results. So I think that's a really important lesson to learn, is that the failures are actually sometimes even more important than the successes, because they point you into which direction is going to be most productive for you to move forward on.
So as from a cultural perspective, then inside the organization, how do you create that safety for people to fail?
I think we just have to be really open about it, right? I don't think we should hide from the fact that most things in biotech fail. I think what we need to really rest upon is most people in this field are here, not just because it's a fun career to have, but hopefully, in your career, if you bring one drug to the market, right, that's already a resounding success, right? And so it's really about, just understanding that most people's careers are going to be dealing with constant failures. Let's not hide from that fact, number one. Number two is to make it very clear that even though we all want to be successful at the end of the day, as long as you've done your job and you've planned those experiments properly and you did what you did, you should be recognized for that. And so we don't punish people because of failure. I think we recognize that failure is part of that process. And I think thirdly is, again, making it very crystal clear that we learn from failure. I think this has actually become even more relevant in the era of AI. Again, this is maybe a little bit too much of a detail, but you can't actually train an AI algorithm unless you actually have failures and successes, right? The computer needs to know what is good and what is bad to be able to determine the correct answer. And so in any experiment that we're creating these days, especially ones where we're testing tens of thousands of things at a time, I'm okay with 99% failure rate, because that actually is helping us to train that computer to recognize what are the patterns of success, what are the patterns of failure, and actually help us increase our success rate at the end of the day. So it's really about, I think, setting up a culture where you recognize that failure is okay, as long as you've done your job properly and you're executing on it. And two is, as an organization, let's see if we can turn that 99% failure rate to a 98, to a 95, to a 90%, to a 50%, and really consistently drive that number down. That's really what we're looking for.
Yeah, I think it's really neat, though, that you've created this safety inside the organization, because a lot of people are so afraid of failure, and they are reprimanded for it. And when that happens, that stifles innovation. That stifles progress, the kinds of progress you're trying to make. So again, just kind of commending you for creating those conditions where people feel like they can fail. It makes them feel safe, and it will make their innovations just go even faster.
Yeah.
Well, I think on that note, I think this is a perfect place to end. So Tim, thank you so much for sharing just briefly your experience and how you've built this culture. We'll check back in with you in a couple months and just see how things are going. And thank you again for your time today.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a fun conversation.